Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive. Today, we are going to be exploring something really fascinating, and that is humanity's just endless fascination with immortality.
Oh, yeah.
It's something that's been with us for, well, since we became aware of ourselves, right?
Uh-huh.
And the sources you shared have really given us a lot to dig into today. We have ancient burial rituals, philosophical musings on existence, even modern scientific forays into life extension.
Right.
We even have a true crime story that seems to touch on this very desire for, lasting significance. What's the mission today? What are we hoping to find out?
I think for me, what's most striking is the wide range of ways that humans have tried to grapple with this whole concept of mortality.
Yeah.
Like, I
Yeah.
mean, over thousands of years and across so many different cultures, it's just amazing to see how this quest to somehow transcend death has played out. So I think in this deep dive, we really want to kind of unpack these different conceptions of immortality, try to understand what are the core human motivations that drive this persistent desire,
Mm-hmm.
and ultimately maybe consider what this tells us about life itself.
Yeah. I love that. Okay, so let's get started. I think we have to go all the way back to the ancients and see how they dealt with death. We've got some really amazing insights from ancient Egypt and Greece. Their beliefs about the afterlife, well, they couldn't be more different.
Oh, absolutely. It's really incredible how much the idea of the afterlife just permeated ancient Egyptian society.
Yeah.
Like even the death and ancient civilizations and immortality and Egyptian dream sources, they both point to this.
Mm-hmm.
This whole mummification process, I mean,
Yeah.
the effort to preserve the physical body, that wasn't just about remembrance.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
it was really tied to the belief in the Ka.
Mm.
It's like a vital spiritual essence, and it was believed to be connected to the body.
Uh-huh.
So they thought that the Ka needed a physical form to exist in the afterlife,
Yeah.
to experience things, like even like food and pleasure.
Right.
I mean, it's so interesting. When you look at their tombs, they're filled with all these goods and provisions. It's almost like they were packing for eternity.
It's like, yeah, they thought they could take it with them.
Right. And it really underscores this deep-seated need to kind of deny the finality of death, to create this sense of continuity.
Mm-hmm. It's almost like they couldn't accept that this was the end. It had to keep going.
Exactly.
And then there's the Book of the Dead. I mean, this collection of spells, it's basically a guidebook for navigating the afterlife.
Yeah, I mean, it was like a roadmap to eternity, right? It provided, this essential knowledge for navigating all the dangers, facing judgment, and ultimately becoming justified in the eyes of Osiris.
So wait, what does justified actually mean here?
Yeah, so in the lecture we looked at, it was suggested that becoming justified was kind of like a moral mummification,
Oh,
a way to be purified from all the earthly transgressions. I mean, it's so interesting how even in the afterlife, there was this idea of moral purity. Like you had to be worthy of eternity.
that's really fascinating. So it wasn't just about surviving death, but surviving in a specific state of being, a worthy state.
Right, exactly.
But even back then, there were some Egyptians who weren't so sure about this grand vision of the afterlife, right?
Yeah, even in ancient Egypt, there were always these dissenting voices.
Interesting.
Like in the Immortality and Egyptian Dream source, there were later texts and even some kind of depressing banquet songs that questioned the traditional views of the afterlife.
Oh, really? What kind of things did they say?
Well, there was this one line that stuck with me. The house of those in the West is deep and dark. There is no door, no window in it.
Wow, that is bleak.
Right. I mean, it's a stark contrast to the elaborate preparations in this paradise they were hoping for. It's like even back then, there was skepticism and alternative viewpoints, even within what seemed like a very unified belief system.
Yeah, so it's not like everyone just accepted the mainstream view. There were always those who questioned.
Exactly. And then we move on to ancient Greece, and it's a completely different focus.
Yeah.
Instead of preserving the body, they were much more concerned with memory and how you were remembered by the community.
So less about what awaited you and more about how you were remembered.
Dude.
That's a huge difference, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Death, burial, and the afterlife in ancient Greece really emphasizes that.
Mm-hmm.
They believed that the psyche, the soul, left the body like a breath, and proper burial rites, those weren't about ensuring passage to another realm like in Egypt.
Okay.
In fact, neglecting these rituals was seen as a serious insult to human dignity, like it's mentioned in the Iliad.
Mm.
They had this whole sequence of rituals, the prothesis, the ekphora, and then the interment.
Yeah, and they really valued those rituals, didn't they?
Oh, absolutely. It showed respect for the deceased and the importance of a dignified farewell. It wasn't about the journey to the afterlife. It was about honoring the life that had been lived.
Okay. So what about those elaborate grave markers we always see? The statues, the stelae, what was their purpose?
Those were super important. They served as tangible reminders, ensuring that the deceased's name and memory would continue on within the community.
So their afterlife was kind of woven into the fabric of the community itself.
Exactly. It highlights this cultural value placed on earthly reputation and social continuity, even beyond individual death. So you see, for the Egyptians, it was about being in the afterlife, whereas for the Greeks, it was about being remembered.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And didn't we come across Zoroaster briefly?
Yes, the Immortality and Egyptian Dream lecture briefly mentions Zoroaster's concept of the soul.
Mm-hmm.
This idea that there's a duality to it, the righteous and the wicked souls, and they're judged and separated.
Yeah, and that idea of judgment, it pops up in a lot of different religions, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. It sort of adds a moral dimension to what happens after death.
Yeah. Right. Okay, so we've looked at some of these ancient perspectives, but let's get to the heart of it. Why are we as humans so obsessed with immortality? Several of the sources suggest a really straightforward answer: the fear of death.
I mean, you can't really overstate the impact of knowing that we're going to die, right?
No, it's a pretty big deal.
Like, both podcast summary, Mortality, Immortality, and the Human Condition, and how the fear of death gave birth to religion, they emphasize that.
Mm-hmm.
We're kind of unique in the animal kingdom because we're aware of our own finite existence.
Mm-hmm.
And that awareness, it creates a lot of anxiety.
Yeah, it's heavy stuff.
And the idea that one day we just won't be, that's a powerful motivator for our beliefs and actions.
And this fear, it's not just like some passive emotion, right?
Right.
The Beyond the Veil transcript and that academic PDF, they talk about terror management theory, which suggests that this fear actually shapes our beliefs and actions. Am I right?
Absolutely. Terror management theory suggests that this awareness of death,
Mm.
it creates this fundamental psychological tension in us. And to deal with that, we develop belief systems, cultural values, worldviews, anything that can give our lives meaning and maybe even offer a sense of, symbolic or even literal immortality.
Right, like we're trying to create something that outlasts us.
Right.
Okay, so does that mean religion is basically a way to cope with this fear of death?
The sources, like how the fear of death gave birth to religion, definitely suggest that. Religion can provide comfort, especially with the promise of an afterlife. But it's not always that simple.
Really? Why not?
Well, Why We Fear Death and How to Overcome It and the PDF, they actually point out that there's a correlation sometimes between strong religious belief and a greater fear of death.
Wow, that's kind of counterintuitive.
It is, right. There are a few theories about why. Maybe moderately religious people are in this sweet spot where they don't have absolute certainty, which can be comforting, but they're also not in complete denial.
Oh.
Or it could be that people who are already more anxious about death are drawn to religion to try to manage that fear.
Makes sense. So it's a bit of a chicken or egg situation.
Right.
And then there's the individual side of this, like how each of us deals with the fear of death on a personal level.
Yeah, absolutely. When the fear of death is unhealthy and why we fear death, both delve into those personal anxieties. Like, it's not just about our own demise.
Yeah, it's often about the people we'll be leaving behind.
Exactly. Like, we worry about loved ones, their well-being, especially if they depend on us. And, sometimes this fear, it can become unhealthy, like an obsession with health or overly cautious behavior. It's interesting, though, the sources pointed out that women tend to report a higher fear of death than men.
Do you think it's because they're more willing to talk about it, or maybe societal expectations play a role?
It could be both. Maybe women are socialized to be more aware of vulnerability or to prioritize caregiving.
Yeah.
It's also worth noting that attachment styles seem to play a part.
What do you mean by that?
Well, people who feel secure in their relationships tend to have less fear of death. It's like having that strong social support system provides a buffer against existential anxiety.
So it's not just about our own individual fear, but also about our connections to others.
Exactly.
Okay. So we've talked about the fear of death, but there's also this other side to it, isn't there? Like the desire to leave a lasting impact, to achieve something meaningful that outlives us.
Yeah, that brings us to the whole concept of legacy and spiritual immortality. Text Collé and the Will Humans Ever Be Immortal? Arendt will both talk about this. Humans have always sought to achieve a form of immortality through their actions, their creations, or their contributions.
It's like we want to make a dent in the universe, leave our mark.
Right. Like think about poets,
Yeah.
as Martinez mentions. Their words can resonate for centuries after they're gone.
It's a form of immortality through art.
Exactly. And then there's the biological immortality of having children.
Oh, yeah, that comes up in Texcali, doesn't it?
It does, and it's such a primal urge, you know? It's like this belief that without offspring, your lineage ends, and a part of you dies with it. There's a quote that really captures this: "Whoever leaves behind progeny does not truly die."
So it's about ensuring the continuation of your line, extending yourself through future generations.
Exactly. And then, we have Hannah Arendt, and her perspective is so interesting. She draws a distinction between this kind of earthly immortality, the kind achieved through legacy, and a more eternal divine existence.
Oh, yeah. What was that about?
Both Text Call A and An Earthly Immortality talk about it. And Arendt, she explores how humans grapple with their mortality by trying to create something lasting. But she makes a distinction between eternity, which she often associates with, like a divine realm, and immortality, which for her is more about achieving a lasting impact within the world, being remembered in history. It's about leaving a mark that endures.
It's a subtle but important difference. So for Arendt, it's not about escaping death completely, but about how you live your life and the impact you have.
It's exactly.
Okay, so let's fast forward to the present day. We've gone from pyramids and Greek statues to something totally different. The dream of technological immortality, or transhumanism.
Right. The dream of immortality, transhumanism.
Yeah.
Transcript, that's where we get into some really wild ideas.
It's mind-blowing.
Transhumanism, it's a modern take on this age-old quest.
Yeah.
It's all about using technology to overcome our biological limits.
It's like we're trying to hack our way into immortality.
In a way, yeah.
And there's this concept of the technological singularity, right?
Yeah, that's this hypothetical point where artificial intelligence surpasses human intelligence. And it's thought that could lead to some huge breakthroughs, maybe even transcending biological death. It's a big if, but some people really believe it's possible.
Yeah, and that 2045 initiative timeline, it's pretty crazy. Controlling robot avatars, brain transplants, uploading consciousness. It sounds like science fiction.
I know, it's pretty wild. But there are people who are working towards this.
So the ultimate goal is to transfer our consciousness into something artificial and basically live forever digitally.
Exactly.
But the transcript also raises some pretty big red flags, right? Like, what about the ethical implications?
Yeah, that's a huge issue. The dream of immortality, transhumanism. Video brings up questions about access and equality.
Right, like what if only the wealthy can afford to become immortal?
Exactly. And what about the implications for human nature itself?
Yeah, what does it even mean to be human if we can just upload our minds into machines?
Right. It raises so many fundamental questions.
And then we have the scientists chiming in with, will humans ever be immortal? And the dream of eternal life on Earth. They bring us back down to Earth, so to speak.
Right back to biological reality.
So what are they saying? Are they completely dismissing the idea of immortality?
Well, current scientific understanding says that we do have biological limits, like we have cellular senescence, where our cells just stop dividing and repairing themselves.
Oh, I've heard of that. It's basically like our bodies are programmed to age.
Yeah, and then there are genetic mutations, entropy. Even with the best healthcare, the maximum human lifespan is probably somewhere between 120 and 150 years.
So there's a hard limit on how long our bodies can function no matter what we do. That seems to be the case. One of the sources pointed out something interesting. Our recovery time from illness doubles every 15 years.
So we get weaker and more vulnerable as we age.
Exactly. So while transhumanism dreams of breaking free from these limitations, science is saying, hey, we're still down by biology, at least for now.
Okay, so let's shift gears again and get a little more philosophical.
Yeah.
The idea of consciousness itself having some kind of immortality, like in the Why Consciousness is Immortal transcript, that's a really mind-bending concept.
Right, yeah.
So walk me through it.
Okay, so Clark and Harris, they argue that our subjective experience, the continuous stream of awareness, that might be a fundamental aspect of reality that doesn't just disappear when we die.
Wait, so it's not about my consciousness continuing, but more like consciousness as a universal thing that keeps going. Right, they call it generic subjectivity.
Yeah.
It's this idea that consciousness might be a continuous thread that runs through all beings, And even if individual consciousness ends, the emergence of another conscious being is like a continuation of that thread.
So it's like a river that keeps flowing, even if the individual drops of water disappear.
Exactly. It's a really different way of looking at immortality, and it's not tied to any specific religion or belief system.
And did Harris have anything to add to this?
Oh yeah, he said that even if you die, the future birth of any conscious being could be seen as your own rebirth, but in this broader sense of continuous consciousness.
So in a way, we're all part of this larger interconnected web of consciousness.
Right.
Okay. And the sarconsciousness discussion, that brought up some other interesting but maybe less scientifically accepted ideas, like near-death experiences and past lives.
Yeah, that forum really highlighted the debate about whether things like near-death experiences or out-of-body experiences
Wow.
could be evidence for consciousness existing beyond the physical body.
Mm.
Some people interpret these experiences as proof, but the majority of scientists tend to explain them as neurological events or false memories triggered by stress or trauma.
Right, so there's not really any hard evidence.
No, not yet. And then you have those stories about children remembering past lives, which are really intriguing, but again, there's no scientific consensus
Yeah, so it's a mystery.
for now.
Okay, so we're constantly reminded of our own mortality, and that leads us to some really big questions about the meaning of life.
Right.
And maybe even, the meaninglessness of it all, like in text collé.
Yeah, when you face the possibility of your own non-existence, it really forces you to confront some fundamental questions about purpose and what really matters.
Yeah, it's a pretty existential crisis.
For some people, it can be incredibly anxiety-provoking, but for others, it can actually be a source of motivation to really appreciate life and focus on what's important.
Okay, so now I've got to say, this was a pretty jarring transition in our source material, but we have to talk about the Beyond the Veil true crime documentary and the case of Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow.
Yeah.
This is a really dark and disturbing example of this human desire for transcendence and significance taken to a really extreme and tragic level.
Yeah, it really is. What's so unsettling about this case is how Daybell's obsession with the afterlife, his claims about seeing beyond the veil, seem to have gotten completely twisted and connected to some horrific acts.
Yeah?
Like Professor Merlin Murray said, this could be an opportunity to confront death and escape it while inflicting it on someone else. It's chilling.
It really is, and the transcript really emphasizes Daybell's need for recognition, his failed attempts at publishing, the disappointment over not becoming a bishop. All of that might have fueled a deep anxiety about his own mortality and legacy.
Yeah, he seemed to crave validation, you know? Maybe he saw his writing as divinely inspired, a way to gain significance and transcend his own limitations. It's interesting, they mentioned that he went back to working in a cemetery after his publishing career failed.
Oh, wow.
It's like this constant, maybe unhealthy confrontation with death.
And then Lori Vallow comes into the picture, and things really escalate. It's almost like Daybell felt more pressure to prove his prophecies, and that led to this whole zombie and light and dark ideology that ultimately had devastating consequences for Lori's children.
Right. It seems like with Vallow there, he needed to assert his beliefs even more, you know? The zombie concept, it's like a literal manifestation of death and evil that needed to be destroyed. And maybe it also speaks to his struggles with disgust and anxiety about death and impurity.
It's like he was trying to create this pure world.
Right. Cleansed of anything that reminded him of death or imperfection.
The idea that kleos, that ancient Greek concept of immortality through fame, might have been a motivating factor, that's a really disturbing thought.
Oh yeah, that's a really unsettling idea, that maybe he was seeking a twisted form of immortality through notoriety, even if it meant committing horrible acts. It's like this desperate attempt to gain power over life and death.
Absolutely. And it's really important to stress that we're just reporting on what's in the source material.
Right, of course.
We're not endorsing or validating any of the beliefs or actions described.
Definitely not.
But this case does serve as a really stark warning, doesn't it? It shows how this fear of death, combined with a distorted worldview and a need for validation, can lead to unimaginable tragedy.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground today. We started with the ancient Egyptians preparing for their eternal afterlife. Then we had the Greeks focused on remembrance and legacy. We looked at spiritual aspirations, the modern quest for technological immortality, the philosophical depths of consciousness, and then this truly disturbing true crime case.
It's been a whirlwind, right?
Yeah, but I think one thing is clear. Humans are just obsessed with mortality.
Yeah, it seems to be this core part of the human experience, this
Right.
yearning to transcend death in some way, whether it's through actually surviving, leaving a legacy behind, or even in those really messed up cases, achieving a twisted kind of notoriety.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the main takeaways here.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I think it's worth asking, what does this whole quest for immortality tell us about how we understand life, about time, about what truly matters? It's a question that deserves a lot more thought. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Until next time.